Now entering Nerdist.com.
Mission Log Supplemental. Star Trek into Bob Orci.
Welcome into another supplemental edition of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm John Champion.
John Champion, this is crazy. This is crazy.
How is it crazy, Ken?
I think I actually said in this interview, and I don't remember if it made the edit or not, but I think I actually said in the interview, if I weren't part of the conversation that people are about to hear, I would be so jealous. We got like an hour and a half, I think, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of time to spend with a rather mercurial character this summer, I would say.
Oh. Are you referring to the mercurial Bob Orci?
Well,
yes.
Is he mercurial or the situations around him? It's been a nutty summer for him. I mean, I would say it's been a good summer for him. Mm-hmm. But then, if you're somebody who cares what the people who actually pay attention to what you're doing think, because, you know, there are some people in Hollywood who don't, you know, from some of the stuff that's gone on online, and then certainly from if you're lucky enough, and let me stress again, I am so incredibly lucky. We are so incredibly lucky to have had this had this opportunity.
Yeah. If
you're lucky enough to talk to him, Bob Orci cares what people think.
Well, yeah, he does. I mean, that's what's so cool is that a lot has been made about him coming into Star Trek as a fan. Like among the people who are creating new Star Trek, he's the guy that always gets tagged as being the fan. And then you have this balance between him and JJ and Lindelof and Kurtzman that some don't know that much, but he knows a lot. And he's been sort of the guy to champion the cause of the other fans. But then we are slapped with the cold, hard reality of making a movie and decisions that have to get made. And maybe those decisions aren't the most popular decisions. So Bob, bless him, goes on to message boards and he pays attention to what other fans are saying. And he engages in conversation. And sometimes that conversation gets heated. But I think you and I took a little bit different tactic because it's not our style now, is it?
Well, not when he's in the room, no.
Well, no. Okay, not when he's in the room. You know, someday maybe you and I will sit down and actually we have done that a little bit. We'll hash out our differences about Star Trek Into Darkness. But when we have him in the room, as we did not that long ago, we try to elevate the conversation, I think. As hard as that may be for us to do. And we try to really figure out the thought process behind Into Darkness, whether liking it or not. How did they arrive at the decisions they arrived at in developing Into Darkness? It wasn't just a blow by blow. Why did you do this? Why did you do this?
You know what? You know what? Let's do. Let's just. I mean, I think we've talked around it enough. Let's let people into this really quite in depth, quite cordial,
okay.
and honestly, I think very informative conversation that you and I got to have with Bob Orci.
And here we are with Bob Orci, one of the co-writers of Star Trek from 2009 and Star Trek Into Darkness. And he was kind enough to sit down, Ken, with you and me, and we're going to talk about Trek. And, you know, we do this every week. We're going to say that we're not going to break the timeline. You and I are talking about the original series at this point in Mission Log, but we're going to break the timeline. We're going to talk about the J.J. Abrams version of Star Trek. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I want to sort of start things off, though, by getting some background on our guest. I want to understand where you're coming from with your Star Trek fandom. I want to know what you grew up watching. You know, who were the characters that really spoke to you? What were the themes and stories that stuck with you?
Let's see. Born in Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
Used to visit my uncle who was living with his parents, my grandparents in Florida. And it was as a kid, 6, 7, 8, where in Florida, my uncle, who I named the captain of the Kelvin after, Mr. Richard Rabau, introduced me to Star Trek, the original series. And he just made it plain to me at that point that it was the first time that legitimate sci-fi had been on television when he was a kid, or when he was younger. And that was sort of my entry into sci-fi. I'd watch it with him, and then just in the summer, and then when Star Trek Wrath of Khan came out, that was the first film that I saw in the theater of a Star Trek movie. So the original series, Wrath of Khan, and then in high school, Next Generation came out, and that was one that I was able to watch as it came out. I wasn't catching up on reruns and stuff, and that one very much spoke to me. So those are the 3 touch points that really solidified me as a Trek fan.
So give me your take on that. What was it that stood out to you? I mean, I think that when Ken and I talk about Star Trek, one of the things we talk about is how we get to keep reapproaching these shows with fresh eyes. And maybe sometimes it's the spaceships and the action, and other times it's the character interactions or the politics of the philosophy of the show. What about you?
Obviously, those things are a part of it, and I think it's a lot of it for a lot of people. For me, just thinking back now viscerally, the idea that smart people could be thinking their way through problems, I thought was interesting. And then the contrast to no matter how smart you are and no matter how moral and how much you're thinking, sometimes you must do battle. And that was always an interesting goalpost of the series for me. You can be a genius astrophysicist who cares nothing more than to maintain the peace, and yet you may still have to fire your phasers and your photon torpedoes. And when does that red line get crossed?
Interesting. So your uncle introduces you to the original series. Was it the kind of thing that you were able to eventually watch it and go, okay, well, these are my favorites and these not so much? I mean, is there a particular one, or was it just wow, and just like absorbing the whole thing? Like, is there, well, I guess when you were a kid and then, flash forward to now, what are the particular episodes of the original series that kind of carry those messages for you?
Balance of Terror really sticks out in my mind as sort of a mix of exploration and meeting a new race and how you're going to deal with it. Obviously, the time travel episodes always blew my mind. Letting Joan Collins die is still seared into my psyche. Anytime that they tackled, at the time I thought they were all sort of mind-blowing. Even meeting Greek gods on a planet to me was just an incredible mashup of ideas. And then obviously as you get older and you revisit, then the favorites start to come out. But at the time it was just so not anything you'd ever seen. And even at the time for me as a kid, I probably saw it around the same time that Star Wars was coming out, and I remember vividly thinking, okay, Star Wars is amazing, but I can't watch it at home. I can watch Star Trek at home. And so there was an element of it also just being just ubiquitous and having so many episodes of it. It seemed sort of like an endless resource of ideas in sci-fi. I just remember thinking, wow, this is a whole universe, whereas Star Wars seemed like a one-off,
What are the strengths and weaknesses of Star Trek? Whether you approach it as a fan or approach it as a writer, you're given this sort of set of rules, some vaguely defined, some very well defined. You just hit on something that I thought was very funny. There's a line in Star Trek 2009 where Pike says that Starfleet is what a peacekeeping armada.
Mm-hmm.
So two ideas which are potentially canceling each other out.
Mm-hmm.
So, are these the kinds of things that are difficult to wrap your head around? Maybe when you approach it as writing something new, you at least have to have in your head the idea of the rules of Starfleet, the rules of what they're capable of doing or not capable of doing. So,
well, the idea of the peacekeeping armada is very much by design. As I said, one of the things that struck me early on about Star Trek was the idea of peacekeepers who sometimes have to get involved in space battle. And, I think that's very much a debate a reflection of what we're all going through, even again right now. We've been going through it for a long time, but it's in particular sort of sticking out right now in relation to whether or not we're going to go into Syria, etc. So though that sounds like an oxymoron, it's purposeful. Mm-hmm. And the purpose is so knowing those rules, you want to be mindful of, for me anyway, I think I've talked about the first movie, Kirk and Spock were sort of Bush and Obama. Spock is Obama, Kirk is Bush. And then obviously in Into Darkness, you're seeing a play out of when do we preemptively attack or not. And so you asked, what is it? Is that a challenge for me? Since that was always in my mind from early on, I sort of embrace that challenge. I like ruminating on when's the right time to throw a punch and when isn't it, and that to me has always been. It's kind of at the center of the friendship between Kirk and Spock and Bones. It's what's the debate, and what will we rule? How will Kirk rule at the end? What will he decide to do? And will it be in the interest of peace or in the interest of aggression? And sometimes aggression, not to be a total one-sided, aggression sometimes is necessary and necessary to maintain the peace. Some things are worth fighting for. And so what are those things?
Let me ask you, so we talk about the fact that, as a writer approaching Star Trek, you have to know, sort of the rules of Star Trek. You have to know some of the ideas. And yes, you get to play with them, but you got to know some of that. Let's step back for a second and just... Was there any part of you that was like, I don't want to? I mean, this is big, and you know that. For a number of reasons. I mean, certainly you've had a bit of interaction with fans.
No doubt. Are you kidding? I didn't want to touch it. 8 months before we said yes, we got a call from Paramount, a great executive over there who's a friend of ours, Mark Evans, who said, hey, you guys want to do Star Trek? Would you be interested in it? And it's like, yeah, we're interested, but we're not. I don't want to come and screw it up. And I don't want to mess with something that I love. So I don't know. Unless we have an idea, we're not just going to say yes. So cut to 8 months later, and we had an idea. And it wasn't until then that ultimately what made us say yes is like, well, clearly Paramount is serious about redoing this, and they're going to hire someone to screw it up. So it might as well be me and my cohorts. And, started to look at it as like a call to duty. Like, okay, look, Star Trek has called me, and I'm going to serve. And I'll do my best. And if I fail, I will have failed with all good intentions. But we were not going to take it on cynically. I considered it a cultural treasure from minute one. And don't curate cultural treasures in a precious museum if you don't know what you're doing. And we decided, okay, I think we have enough of a strong instinct here that I can compare to other things I've heard and say to someone with a straight face, put me in the game, coach. And that's what we did.
Let me ask, you said earlier that one of the things that appealed to you about Star Trek when you were a kid was that you could watch it at home, whereas Star Wars, you went to the movies. I don't know about you, but the first time I saw Star Wars, I thought, I'm never going to see anything like this again, because I was, 7, and I didn't realize that there would be Empire Strikes Back, and, well, we could stop there if you want to, but I guess what I'm wondering is, there was a question that was asked a few years ago at the Star Trek convention by one of the moderators. I guess I could name him. That would be a nice thing to do, wouldn't it? It was Larry Nemechek. The question was, does Star Trek need to be on TV? And I guess what I want to ask you is, obviously, again, Paramount was going to make movies, so why wouldn't you, be part of it, especially if you felt like you could do a decent job with it or a good job with it? Would you rather write for Star Trek on television, or would you rather write for Star Trek in the movies? And does Star Trek need to be back on TV?
It's funny, my writing partner and I started in television, and at the time we were on these syndicated shows, Hercules, Legendary Journeys, and Xena, Warrior Princess. Mm-hmm. And there was a real snobbery from the film community and from even the network community about syndicated TV. Cut to present day, where the line between TV and film is so blurred, and and some of the best writing is on TV and cable. And so, to answer your question, I do think Star Trek is wonderful for TV. I think it should be both. And I remember thinking during some of the movies, I've had the feeling where I watched, for example, a Next Generation movie, I won't say which, just not to isolate it, but where I loved it, but I also thought, you know what, it slightly succumbed to the trappings of movie making. Mm-hmm. It became a lot of action and not enough philosophy. I remember thinking that myself, and it's interesting to read that criticism of some of the stuff that we've done in the last two, which TV affords you a little bit, for sure, because you're arcing out these characters, over 22 episodes if you're lucky a season. Mm-hmm. But I do think that audiences are sophisticated enough that Star Trek can be Star Trek in both mediums now. And maybe let's consider a third medium, which is online. Star Trek it ain't going anywhere. It's going to outlive all of us, and it's going to be translated into every kind of delivery system you can imagine. And TV, it's not going away from TV either. It just depends on when it comes back and how it's programmed against the movies.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, we're talking about it very seriously and as something that will endure. Why in the world is it that important? I mean, is this entertainment, or is it something more? And if it is something more, what is that thing that we're getting out of it?
The characters in Star Trek are now cultural archetypes. They are, I think, as ingrained into parts of our culture as some Shakespearean characters. And that is because they represent elemental personifications of our nature. I'm not saying anything anyone who's listening to this doesn't know, but emotion versus logic, leap before you look versus planning ahead. These are all like basic things that we all struggle with, and they were these elemental characteristics of human nature were put in an incredible package of a gorgeous starship, checking things out all over the place. Who doesn't want to do that? So it just happens to be a part of our culture and a part of our psyche. When it was born, I think was a big part of it. Transformational moment in our culture in terms of the 60s. I think I've talked about this before, the idea of Kirk being a reminder for Kennedy 5 years after his death. Kennedy, who struggled himself with what's the red line? A cold warrior who turned to peace during his tenure. A guy who was not afraid to fight and yet kept us out of the Cuban Missile Crisis, kept us out of Bay of Pigs, tried to keep us out of war and had to fight to do so and probably died to do so. That was just ringing in our ears when Star Trek came out. It was a fantasy of the continuation of Camelot in my mind. I think that's partly why it was seared into a lot of brains. It was therapy for the country, and it was a what if scenario of what if Camelot had continued.
So I'm guessing then that for you personally, you'd rather write for something that is either the original series or a reboot of the original series as opposed to something that is next gen or a reboot of that. Because, I mean, the cool thing about the original series is you just get to write on out, whereas 100 years later with next gen, you're dealing with sort of a more mature, I don't want to go so far as to say middle-aged because we're only talking about 100 years later, but you're dealing with a much more mature, organization and a much more mature set of ideas.
I gotta say I'm torn about that because I really loved Next Generation. It's still my favorite show that I was able to watch in real time, mm-hmm. in terms of when it was on, when I was watching new episodes as they came out, right? And it was of my time. If I had been of age to watch the original series, I'm sure I would have felt differently. But Next Generation happened. It's sort of like the guys who like Roger Moore instead of Sean Connery as James Bond. That's me too. Yeah. Just because he was of my time. So No, I'd say there's. In fact, I'm hoping with the next movie that we can sort of get back to square one and sort of say that these characters are now who you always knew them as, and they've been maturing in these two movies, and let's see where they go in the next one. But I wouldn't mind writing for either. I think the principles still apply. You know, what's nice about the original series, obviously, is that was the first few members of the band, and that's the band that culture remembers the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's nice to play with cultural icons that everyone knows, so that you're not spending time doing anything other than taking these icons into the situations they should be into that are interesting. And so it's just nice to have a broad palette that way that everyone understands. That's not to say that the mature themes of Next Generation aren't super fun. I mean, it's interesting to read the different criticisms of different shows and having some people say, well, Next Generation was so utopian and this and that, and which I loved. You know, I used to dream about being, you know, on the Enterprise with Picard and, you know, families and soccer games and, you know, all the stuff that they had on that ship that they didn't have on the original ship. Both are appealing. The drama of the conflict of the 60s that the original series represents is obviously appeals to me because I like a good fight. But hey, who doesn't like a utopian thing where exploration is truly the word of the day and conflict comes out of that?
So how do you approach then, whether it's as a writer or just as a fan, finding that balance between action and conflict versus drama, you know, human drama, emotional drama, and the sort of philosophical underpinnings?
We always start with the philosophical and the character. And if we have a theme and a character dynamic that we know is going to rule the day, and we believe in it, and we know, okay, that's a worthy character dynamic, and that's a worthy character story, and that's a worthy theme. If we believe we have that, then we try and pack as much action into that as we can and try to tell it through action. So, first movie is Kirk and Spock. It's Lennon and McCartney coming together, and we very much, I think I've talked about this, based sort of a little bit of what they went through on Lennon and McCartney's actual experience. There were two opposites who both lost a parent early on, and as a result of that loss, were able to understand each other in a way that they might not have been able to since they were so different. And that's what we did with Kirk and Spock in Star Trek 09. And so two opposites coming together to take each other farther than they could ever take each other, that is a worthy enough theme for us that then it's like, okay, now let's pack it in. Because we know that's what's happening every moment. No matter what's going on, that's the story that's being told. And I think the pace of the movies sometimes, I think, leaves people to have to watch it again a little bit to see what the theme is, because they do go by fast, and they do have a lot of sound and fury. But behind them is this theme. And in the second one, obviously the themes of preemptive war, war at a distance, justice, rule of law, and two friends realizing that they're friends. Those things permeate all the action for me. But we always start there. We always like to say, if you can make an independent movie out of your theme and your character dynamic, that's how you know you have it. If you can't make an independent movie out of it, don't do it. But once you have that theme, then you add the space battles and the giant robots and the aliens and the this and that. But you have to start with that central theme.
Can you help us to understand then how, you say that you approach this starting with the character, the emotional core, the philosophical core, and then build the movie around that. Help us and our audience understand, what part of Star Trek 09, Star Trek Into Darkness, are your fingerprints, and either your co-writers or JJ. I'll give you an example, like Man of Steel, a movie that I enjoyed on a lot of levels. I felt like you could almost pull the scenes out that had Christopher Nolan's thumbprint, and then the other scenes that had Zack Snyder's thumbprint. It's a little more difficult to do with Star Trek. So I'm curious your take on that. What of your ideas specifically are front and center, where and when? And then how does that get altered or expanded upon when it actually goes in front of the camera?
Well, in the 2009 movie, we didn't say yes until Alex and I, Alex and I have been writing together for 23 years, holy. So when my first wife and I, Alex, we didn't say yes until we hit upon the notion of what if Spock, as portrayed by Leonard Nimoy, is some way indirectly responsible for coming back in time and changing the universe and making it an alternate universe. And the question becomes, are these people's souls the same? I remember reading, well, I can't get into the new Star Trek because it's not really my characters. It's not the same people. And our response to that is, well, that's actually the debate of the movie. Are they the same souls? And we don't want you to come to the movie to rely on your previous love. They have to earn your love, these characters, anew. And certainly for a new audience who doesn't know Star Trek, these characters must stand on their own. So that was sort of the central idea that Alex and I brought to Star Trek 09. And then we went and pitched it to Nimoy. And he said, well, I'll read a script. Let's see what happens. But it sounds intriguing. And in our minds, if he had said no, we would have been nowhere. I personally couldn't stand. I didn't have another idea for how to do 09. If that hadn't worked, I might have had to step back because it had to preserve canon while freeing us from canon at the same time, and it had to use the rules of Star Trek to do it. And absent that, I would have been faking it. So that was our fingerprints on 09. We roughed out the story, and then we all get in a room, me and JJ and Brian Burke and Damon, who was a producer on the first one. And then you start adding jokes, and then, a lot of the humor, I think, a lot of the humor comes from JJ. He loved Keenzer. Big Hands was his idea. Things like that. He adds a lightness to it. So we sort of set up the Christmas tree, and then the whole family decorates it.
Cool. And that's literally what you do at Christmas, is you set up the tree and JJ comes over to decorate it.
Exactly.
All right.
It's annoying when you put this picture on top of the tree, though. It's
that's
so obnoxious.
Yeah, that's really, really inappropriate. Well, so then this leads me into the idea of, I want you to kind of take us through the story development then. Star Trek 09 ends, your process on that ends, the movie comes out, and it's mostly very well received, and before it comes out that then you're going to start work on the sequel?
I don't. Paramount seem to have a strong opinion, but
yeah,
we have a rule of never count your sequels before they hatch.
Sure.
And I like to see what the response is from people who see the movie, and see what works and what doesn't. So we never engage in anything until it's out.
Okay. So sometimes soon.
But we knew there was an appetite for it.
Right. Okay. So sometimes soon after that movie is out, you start to work on the sequel,
yes,
on Into Darkness. Can you kind of walk us through that process of like breaking that story, where the ideas came from? What was the original premise? I had read somewhere that Khan was sort of put in later. So I just want to get a picture of how it all came together.
So when we were doing the 09 one, we can't help but a couple of nights fantasize about a sequel. And we always talked about that the sequel should be WOK, The Wrath of Kirk. And actually we talked about this before we'd even written Fade Out on the first script, that the second movie could be Wrath of Kirk somehow. And we toyed with having a sort of coda at the end of the 09 movie of maybe Starfleet finding the Botany Bay. So Khan was in our minds. Now, the movie comes out, suddenly it's all real, we're not messing around anymore. We get together, and there is a push from some of the contingent to do Khan, and to do a very Khan-centric story from the beginning. In fact, I think we were sort of playing with the idea of Hearts of Darkness with Khan, the idea that we were sent to some place to catch this guy, Khan, who this or that, who was found in an alternate situation. We collectively stepped back from that because we felt like we were falling into the trap of using a villain based on previous knowledge of a villain, and that we were somehow relying on the audience's expectation and love or hate of Khan to make that story work. And so we stepped back and we said, let's say it's not Khan. Let's just what's a story? What's just like a story with a villain that's got his own situation that doesn't rely ever on anything? And actually, in the original version, we were calling him Robert April. I wanted him to be like a mislead. And so we generated the story of it's a guy who has been used by Starfleet, and he's mad, and he's turned towards terrorism, and we have to go get him. And when we find him, he tells us that he's been abused, that he's slightly a victim of the national security apparatus, and he's actually got somewhat of a case. And there's a cancer within Starfleet, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, all a story you can pitch without saying anyone's name prior. Mm. And then once we had that story, then it became, well, now can it be Khan? So we started at Khan, went away from Khan, and then came back to him because the story that we generated seemed to benefit a little bit from, okay, he's got a secret identity. You didn't know who he was really. Okay, well, if we're going to play a secret identity game, why not have it be this guy? And not only that, they're using him for nefarious purposes because he's got a mind that this and that. He seems better than us. So suddenly, Khan fit into the story that we were telling. We didn't reverse engineer a story to fit in Khan. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting to read some loud criticism of that decision. But I think, and some of the criticism is literally saying, you relied on knowing Khan. My response to that is, it might seem that way to you if you know Khan, but if you don't know who he is, the movie is a self-contained story. The movie explains itself, and it does not rely on you loving Khan before. But I can see how, if you're a fan, you have to. It's hard to unsee something, and it's hard to stare at something fresh if you have such a connection to previous Star Trek, which I do as well.
Yeah.
But I have to serve a broader audience than just us, and we were trying to do both, and hopefully for many we succeeded.
I got to say, hard though this is going to be to believe for people listening to this show, I actually saw the movie with somebody who came with almost no knowledge of Star Trek. I mean, she was aware that there was this franchise called Star Trek and that it had been on TV and in movies.
What?
And probably that there were toys, but she couldn't. I mean, she could name Kirk and Spock. She might have been able to name McCoy, and past that, she's got no knowledge of Star Trek.
Uh-huh.
She was engaged completely, which was. I'm not saying that to say, well, I mean, way to go, but. It did that. It did not rely on your knowledge of Kirk. Khan, excuse me, for people who are coming to it fresh. And I think a lot of people who might get in a fight with you about it don't understand that there are in fact people who are coming to Star Trek fresh.
Right. I think that's right, and I think, and I blame them no less though for the conscious dissonance of seeing a character that you know and it's different, and I understand thinking, well, you were relying on us knowing who he is. If you really pitched a story to yourself, I think you'll find out that that's not the case.
What did you guys talk about those risks as you were building the story and putting Khan in? I mean, there had to have been some understanding.
It was long debates. You know, I held out for a while. Mm-hmm. Because I thought, well, we have a story that works anyway. But, ultimately the idea was, well, you can't do Batman without the Joker, and so that argument sort of won the day, and we all finally unanimously decided, you know what, given the story we're telling, if we don't say it's Khan, people are going to say, oh, it's just a Khan light ripoff.
Right.
So kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. But absolutely, we debated it, and we knew it would be tricky. We knew it would lead to a vocal outcry from some fans. But you know, you got to make tough decisions when you're doing something like this. We don't have the option of some of the original actors, and we have to keep going.
Let me ask you, I've been a vociferous defender of In the Darkness, and I'm not saying that to get in good with you or anything like that, but I have been. And I'll also say there are parts of the movie that I don't like, but welcome to life among the living. The thing that I like about the movie is it seems to, you guys ran a risk. I mean, this is a message movie, and I think some people get so angry about the way that things were treated in the movie, like, Khan is English now instead of Mexican, when, he's supposed to be Mexican.
Being an Indian.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there are people who I think are getting so, tied up in the parts that they don't like about it that they can't step back and say, this movie came not only with a serious message, but a message that if a lot of people picked up on it right away would be an unpopular message among a lot of people, both in this country and around the world. Was there any fear about getting too messagey in the movie? Because I walked away from it thinking, wow, that feels ballsy to take, what is obviously not only a tentpole for the summer, but something that, Paramount's rolling the dice for 100 at this point. 50 years in a couple of years is kind of cool, but they're looking for at least 100, I'm guessing. And then to come out with this thing that really could alienate a lot of people seems like, that was an incredible roll of the dice. From the writer's point of view, that being you and your partners, from the director's point of view, from the studio's point of view. Was there concern that you might be going a little too, I don't know, Star Trek with the whole thing?
No, actually. I think in terms of all of our partners and stuff, I think the message was disguised enough that no one thought to object in a timely fashion. For me, I definitely thought about it. I just turned 40, so as I get older, I get braver and maybe stupider, and so I kind of was like, this is what Star Trek is for. If we can't be protected by the power of Star Trek to try and say something of meaning, then I don't know what I'm doing in this business. So for me, it was, I couldn't actually not do it. So I had to push this agenda. I had to try and make this a debate about what's going on. And I got to hide behind the fact that fans were asking for it. One of the criticisms of the first movie was that it didn't have enough, moral dilemmas and quandaries and philosophical discussions. And so I was like, okay, let's dance. And I think you're right that I think a lot of people did. Not a lot of people. I think some people are confused and put off by something that is so slightly topical. I do think that I got a lot of on the message boards where obviously you get a very vocal group of detractors that may or may not represent huge percentages, but nonetheless they're fans and they need to be heard. And they were like, I don't want to face those things when I'm eating popcorn in the theater. And though they meant it as a criticism, I actually still take that as a compliment. It means that they sat through a popcorn movie that shook them up a little bit. And man, that's hard to do. It's only because of the legacy and the power of Star Trek that we were able to actually have this meditation on current events.
Kind of goes back to what you always say of people who say, well, I like Star Trek, but not with all the Star Trek in it.
Yeah, I was going to say one of my favorite lines comes from you. I like Star Trek except for the space parts.
Right. Right. I see versions of that criticism, a lot. It's interesting. And look, I get it. Like, you definitely go to the movies to escape, but you can escape and still think, you don't. I think the movie can be entertaining and still have something to say.
Sorry, that's what Star Wars is for.
Roddenberry, everybody.
Yeah, good. Yeah, Good. Thank you, Rod.
Normally I keep my silence, but...
I actually said that. I actually said that during the NPR interview that Rod and I did, and they cut it out. And I was so wishing that they would leave that line in. If you can't face this stuff, if you can't, talk about messages, morals, and meanings, go watch Star Wars.
The line lives again. Good. I'm glad.
We're going to keep it alive.
Good. Let's talk about that criticism because going from Star Trek 09 into Darkness, you guys actually incorporated some of that criticism, that feedback, specifically about Kirk's quick ascent to being captain. So you addressed that. What else did you address?
Yeah. So first, yes, we addressed Kirk's quick ascension and made a point of it that everyone thought that in the universe itself, and that's why he's demoted. We addressed the brewery and went to San Francisco and got a proper warp core.
Nice.
We attempted to continue to sort of grow the trifecta of Bones being in there. We made Scotty a little bit less humorous. He actually had, not less humorous, he's just as funny, but gave him meat to chew on. He resigns over weaponry and over the Enterprise's mission not being about exploration and being sort of a military mission. We definitely took in what some fans said and incorporated into the story.
What do you think will be the takeaways from the criticism of Into Darkness that will push you forward into the next one?
I am hoping that these two movies have earned us a degree of freedom to go a little bit more sci-fi. And I know that's a dirty word for a lot of studios. In the first two movies, Paramount has been great in terms of them just trusting all of us in what we want to do. I read a lot of criticism like, oh, you must be following the Paramount formula, the checklist of the thing of they're telling you what to do and all this stuff. They've been nothing but trusting and great. Sadly, in this case, for better or worse, you can't blame the evil studio for whatever you hate about these movies. You got to blame us. So don't blame the corporation for once. And I love blaming corporations, but in this case, it's not the case. Nonetheless, I am privy to a lot of the research that about the trappings of sci-fi, and and they say women don't like sci-fi, and you can't really get into deep space because people like to see Earth in the trailers. Like, there's all kinds of stuff like that trickles into your mind. My hope is that these movies have earned us the right to show another side of Star Trek that we have not fully shown yet, and there's so many sides to it. I think the first two movies that we've done represent, in my mind, a lot of the things that I loved about Star Trek. No one story will represent everything about any franchise that's been around for 50 years. I hope that the third movie we can tell another side of it and have not only some of the things we've seen, but also a genuine sci-fi mystery. I think that'd be nice.
Have you been to a Star Trek convention?
I haven't.
Really?
I've never been to a Star Trek convention.
Because the thing that you just mentioned about the studio not understanding possibly the audience, women don't like sci-fi, that is the core audience. You go to a science fiction convention, especially now when I think the demographic has changed after the 09 movie a little bit, women have always been a significant portion of that
I agree.
fan
I've
base.
argued this with them, and I remember when I was watching Next Generation in high school, half of my sort of peer group that we watched together were girls.
Yeah.
And so when I heard that research, I was like, what? But half my friends who watched Next Generation were girls. So I think Star Trek is maybe unique in that way, and I think I'm not invalidating their research, but I think when it comes to Star Trek, it's a slightly different picture. Mm-hmm. I agree.
With that freedom, and forgive me, maybe you haven't even started thinking about it, although probably you did halfway through writing Into Darkness.
We're actually going to start pitching you stories now.
God bless you. I need something.
Well, what I was going to ask actually is, do you feel like for the next one, if you, given your druthers, assuming, okay, so you've got carte blanche at this point, you've obviously got some stuff that comes with the franchise, namely, the Enterprise, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, all the characters. But the thing that happens next, if you get to do whatever you want to do, does that reference something that happened in, 66 to 69, 68, 69? Or is this, is this a brand new everything as far as you're concerned?
Well, first of all, I'm open to you guys opine. Part of me, the guiding principle of the first two movies was that though it is an alternate universe, much is the same. It's almost it's a harmonization with canon is the way we thought of it. So, for example, Kirk and Spock meeting during the Kobayashi Maru scenario. In my mind, that's something that could have happened in both continuities. That might have exactly been how Kirk and Spock met. I don't know. There are a couple of things that I thought could have been the same, and yet slightly different. Same with Into Darkness. The Botany Bay's out there, but this time the Enterprise didn't find it. Somebody else found it. We've done that twice now. So I think there is a case to be made. My gut at this moment is there's a case to be made. And one last thing before I make the case. And part of being a fan that I always thought was fun about Star Trek was that I'm certainly not the biggest expert on Star Trek. There's thousands and thousands of fans who know what I know, and whose opinion about what should happen next may be just as valid as mine. And it's based on past references. And so I think part of the fun of the Star Trek home game, as I call it, is that part of the reason we wanted to harmonize with canon and to try and use some familiar elements is to allow fans, the way I'd want to be allowed to be, if I was watching this from the outside, to play the home game and imagine what we might do next, given the elements that we all have access to. We've done that twice now, so I think my gut at this moment is the third one, and this is slightly based on some fan response, that the third one just should be unpredictable, and you just don't, that as many new elements as possible is probably the rule of the day. However, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. If there's something that comes up from previous episodes that is an idea that just fits beautifully on the Christmas tree, then don't shy away from it. It's a very non-specific answer, but that's where my feelings are at this moment.
Ken, I know what you're thinking, which is the third movie should be a return to the Miri planet.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah, if you can have it take place, if you can have it take place on Earth but not Earth, that's always an excellent way to start an episode. Well, I'm sorry, a movie. What did I say? Anyway.
They're interchangeable now in my mind. An episode is a movie, and a movie's an episode.
Well, at what point though do you stop listening to fan criticism? And I mean criticism, good or bad. I read the boards too, and I know that you do, and I know that things just got heated on one of the boards. But I go in there as a fan who is not a Star Trek writer, and I go, this is a terrible idea, this is a terrible idea, this is a terrible idea. And we went through the same thing when Enterprise ended, and there was no movie on there. Well, they should have done this. They should have done this. I guess you're lucky in that your writing style is to be collaborative with the other writers and with your director. But, at what point do you just go, okay, well, we accepted this idea, but we just can't go down this other direction, and if the fans aren't happy, or if a contingent of fans aren't happy, so be it.
I never stop reading or listening. One of the rules we have, is one of the skills we've learned as writers, is when you get a note from an executive, they don't necessarily always articulate the exact problem that they have. The audience is never wrong. Let's start there. The audience is never wrong. If they articulate something, you have to listen. What they articulate specifically may not be what they're really meaning to articulate. So the phrase we use is, you're always trying to find the note behind the note. You can't take suggestions too literally. What you're trying to find out is, what are they feeling, and what are they responding to that's making them feel that way, and can you address that some way that still conforms to what you're trying to do? And so never stop listening to the note behind the note. In terms of specific suggestions, it's rare for us to say that's it. The way we do it is we kind of try and find out what our instinct is first. Obviously, we take in the lessons of the movie, we read the criticism, we hide for a while, we come up with an instinct of what we think should happen next, and then we go back into the pool and see what arguments might invalidate what our instinct is. And if the instinct survives all the bows and arrows and cannonballs that exist, then it stands. And if it doesn't, then we go back to the drawing board, hide out, come up with our instinct, and then come out and crash it against opinion. It's sort of our process.
Can I ask, so there are a couple of things, hooks, I almost want to call them, in the darkness in particular, and I'm trying to figure out, are they there so that people understand, okay, well, it's a different universe, but it's the same one, or are they there to sort of dispense with them? I mean, things like the ship that they take to go to the Klingon homeworld was acquired in the Mudd incident. Okay, well, obviously we're not going to meet Harry Mudd for the first time now, and maybe we're not going to meet him. Maybe we're sort of, like winking and nodding to the people who go as far back as the original series. Or are you saying, all right, so that's off the table now? And then the Tribbles, we've had, kind of a couple of times now, so we're not going to have our first run-in with Tribbles, so that's kind of off the table now. Or are they just sort of like, no, I know it's different, but don't worry, I mean, we know you too. I mean, which are those? Or is it just, you won't go wrong, there are jokes that we all tell over and over again because they're comfortable. Which part are those kinds of things?
Well, it's not eliminating anything. And in the Mudd incident, we're referring to an element of the comic books in which you didn't meet Harry Mudd either. You met his daughter.
Oh.
So you could still meet Mudd for the first time. So it's not about eliminating anything. It's about you have in the back of your mind, if you're a Trek fan, some of the things that are popular. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Trek fan who happens to have been in this business and studying audiences and all that kind of stuff, you kind of have a top 10, 20 list of things that that if you mention them, a general audience may be slightly aware. Like you were saying, you took a friend who knows Kirk and Spock, maybe McCoy, probably knows the shape of the Enterprise, a couple things. You keep those things in the back of your mind, and then as you're pursuing a story that doesn't rely on those things, if suddenly you see a place to stick one of those things in there, you do it. And you do it for fun. You do it as a, if you're using a sort of a musical analogy, it's a little sampling of a riff, in your song, and you don't have to be reinventing the wheel every second. If something from Star Trek fits, by all means, use it. It's called Star Trek.
I want to approach something about Space Seed. Because there's a moment where Kirk says that he admires Khan, and Spock is a little put off by this. He doesn't. The guy's a despot, But Kirk says he kind of gets it in a way. And in Star Trek Into Darkness, Khan is the bad guy, but we build empathy for him, particularly in the scene in the brig. So dig a little deeper into Khan. Your thought on the character, on creating a bad guy who's not necessarily a bad guy. And I'm interested in, was this kind of throwing the audience for a little bit of a loop, that we've established Marcus as a bad guy, but then we have this uneasy alliance with Khan. Is the audience meant to keep guessing as to whose side he'll eventually end up on?
Well, let's start with Khan. Let's start with Ricardo Montalban, who had a genuine bone to pick. Yeah. He had a good case. He was left to die in the wrong place, and he was understandably pissed. Kirk and company really did shaft the guy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the origin of Star Trek's greatest villain is indeed rooted in not simply pure evil, but on someone who was genuinely wronged and who was a victim of a system. So starting there, we wanted to continue that and make it even potentially more gray. Villains are only, they say that movies are only as interesting as your villain. That's sort of a, you're only as good as your best villain. And sometimes the best villain is very clearly evil, and the opposite extreme of that is sometimes your best villain is someone who could be you if you were in that situation. So we very purposely wanted to empathize with Khan to the point where you could even argue that he might not have gone totally against Kirk if Kirk hadn't had Scotty stun him at the end. In a way, Kirk betrays him first. So you can't say that he was simply pure evil. It's like, I help you take the ship and then you shoot me, and it's like, okay, that's it. I've had it with you people. Khan in our movie is a mirror to our own dark impulses. He's a victim of Starfleet. He's a victim of being used for nefarious purposes to start war, and I think that's confusing to some. But as Kirk says at the end of the movie, the movie's about let us not let our desire for vengeance or retribution, make us do things that aren't consistent with our values. And it's why Khan doesn't die at the end of this movie. He is indeed now frozen and ready for trial, consistent with intergalactic law. And so, inspired by the original Khan, we wanted to have a villain who seems like a villain at first, and then when you get to understand him, you realize it's not so simple. Villains are as much villains as they are victims of their circumstance in a lot of cases.
Please do not make the third movie The Trial of Khan. We will end this interview now.
Comics. We got that in the comics.
Oh, okay. All right. Good.
You don't want a legal drama for Star Trek 3?
Well,
13, whatever?
No.
No? All right. Spock's a good lawyer.
Yeah, well, I bet he would be. Well, let's talk about that final Kirk speech, because, Ken, you mentioned it earlier, and I know that this is the thing that you really celebrate and identify with in the movie.
Yeah.
Is Kirk's impassioned plea to not do the easy thing, but to do the right thing. And I think, Ken, you can speak to this better than I can about that being actually the heart of the Prime Directive, as opposed to don't mess with this culture.
Yeah. Personally, I'm not, and this is something that I've sort of come to, I came to Star Trek again. I've always been a fan, obviously, and I always watched it. And like you, Next Gen was my Star Trek.
Oh yeah,
yeah, absolutely. But I've come to sort of appreciate the Prime Directive, as John says, not for the fact that we don't screw with other cultures, but for the fact that we've set up a code for ourselves. This is who we say we are, and so now when we get there. And, there's something going wrong that we could very easily fix. Or, there's something that we just don't like about a culture, which is not a lesson that, Kirk had in the first, I guess, season and a half of Star Trek, but he sort of comes to later as far as the Prime Directive is concerned. It's really just about sort of living up to your code. And I loved the Kirk speech at the end of Into Darkness because it was a Kirk speech. It was the Corbomite maneuver speech. It was, it was, hey, guess what? This is going to suck, but this is who we say we are, and this is what we say we're going to do. Is that what the Prime Directive is for you, or are you sort of like, no, if we see a guy with a broken leg, too bad for him because I can't get involved? What is the Prime Directive as far as you're concerned? Is it an important thing as far as letting cultures grow on their own? Is it an important plot device in Star Trek? What does it stand in for, or does it stand for exactly what they say it stands for?
That's interesting. I think you're pointing out something that we maybe did, I think, slightly unconsciously, because I hadn't taken it to that literal level of analyzing the movie in terms of, in a way, the traditional prime directive that we know from Star Trek of not allowing a pre-warp culture to perceive the size of the universe and other life forms. You're right. In a way, we replaced it thematically with let's not violate our values. Let's not preemptively go to war, etc. Which is, in a literal sense, sort of a subset of the Prime Directive, in terms of don't interfere with other cultures if you don't have to. But I think you're right. I think in a way, the movie sets up the idea of a supreme law that shouldn't be violated, and Kirk violates it for peaceful purposes to save his friend. And yet he won't cross this other line, even when he's got orders. In a way, superseding the Prime Directive in his mind, obviously, given his behavior. So that's interesting. I hadn't taken it to that literal level, but I think that's right. I think what appeals to me about it is the real Prime Directive, because we can all root for Kirk when he saves a culture. We can all root for the Enterprise when they violate the Prime Directive to do right. And he says to Spock, look, what I did was technically wrong and morally right, and then you sold me out. And now here you are asking me not to follow my orders and execute Khan, but ultimately agrees with Spock that again morals win out. So yes, rules are meant to be broken, but values are not, and I guess that's the real Prime Directive.
I think that was pretty beautiful.
Hug?
Yeah. That was nice.
Don't misunderstand. I wasn't saying that you guys were replacing that. It's actually just sort of in coming back to this show, for Mission Log. I've sort of had to not had to, but I've chosen to step back and say, okay, so what's the deal with the Prime Directive? Why do I care so much about that? Mm-hmm. And it turns out that I personally don't. I mean, I'm more a fan, and I've said this on this show before, I'm more a fan of the Ian Banks culture novels, where they come across cavemen, well, not cavemen because they need language, but they come across feudal systems and say, hey, we got starships and we can make your life just as easy and just fantastic as you want it. Do you want to be part of this? I mean, to me, that's actually kind of a fun thing. So I don't understand, the whole need to, not help people along the road. So then I've had to sort of step back and say, okay, well, if it's not about that, then, what is the Prime Directive for? And my assumption is it's a constant test for Kirk and Spock and for Starfleet in general. I mean, it's a constant test of, are we going to be who we say we're going to be, or are we going to, are we going to be the people that take the easy way out and start building secret spaceships, and a paramilitary organization that sort of shadows the good guys that we say we are. I kind of don't want to do this because it's been addressed, but
just hit it.
It's but it's something that I hit rather frequently when we talk about the original series on Mission Log. That is sexism in the Star Trek universe, and a lot of people will write to us and say, "Leave it. It was the '60s. These things happened in the '60s. It was a long time ago. Not that long ago, though. We saw Alice Eve, mostly naked, half naked." On screen in Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013. There are people who say it was just gratuitous, it was just terrible. I might actually surprise you. Well, not many people are saying it was terrible, but you get the idea. I might actually surprise you by offering a justification, which blows my mind. But I mean,
God bless you.
Can we may actually disagree on this? But go ahead, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, not a justification, an explanation. I would say a lot of people have said, "Well, it was absolutely useless." Well, no, it's not. And the only reason I would say it's not is because we all know that Kirk goes for the young, hot, whatever. But when we meet Carol Marcus in the Star Trek universe, she's middle-aged, as is Kirk. But we've never seen, that woman that would normally attract Kirk's eye. And so in this movie, we do see her. Of course, then we might actually see more of her than maybe we should have. So maybe it went too far, whatever. But I guess, is there I feel like I would be branded a sellout if I didn't ask you your thoughts on it at this point. So, Alice,
is that your only tough question? That's okay.
Well, I thought some of them were tough, but this is the one. This is the one that I'm most uncomfortable with, honestly, because 50% of our audience will say, "I can't believe you bothered him with that question," and another 50% would say, "I can't believe you didn't ask him when you had a chance." So I guess what I will say is, Alice Eve, Star Trek Into Darkness, the underwear scene. Say what you will.
Well, first of all, you heard it here first. Breaking news. That wasn't Damon's idea. It was JJ's. So don't blame Damon. You can blame him for other things. I certainly do. No. And it was funny. We, originally they were gonna open that torpedo in orbit in space, and so originally we had her going into Kirk chasing her into sort of a room where she was changing into a spacesuit, essentially. So it actually seemed more purposeful when we originally conceived it. For production reasons, we just simply couldn't afford to go out into space, so it turned into the desert floor. And that scene was, though she does, when she's on the desert floor, she's in a different outfit. You could argue that she didn't need to be in a different outfit to be on the desert floor. So it's a slight holdover from the original conception of everyone's changing into a spacesuit, which again made a lot more sense. I can't claim to be an expert on feminism and gender politics at this moment. I can point out that you see Kirk half naked as well in both movies. He's in his underwear. So's Uhura. Did the movie need that scene? No. Have half the websites that I've seen criticize that scene use the exact photograph to publicize their article about the scene? Yes. What else can I tell you about it? Was Alice Eve a good sport? Awesome. I'm actually torn about it. I don't know. You can't watch Miley Cyrus on the VMAs and not be confused about the state of feminism today.
and a lot else. I mean, here's the thing. I'll give you my perspective on it. Not that you asked, but
what's your perspective on it?
Well, here's I'm so glad you asked,
Bob.
Yes. I have absolutely no problem with sexual content, nudity, whatever in a movie. It's great. It's one of the reasons we all love the James Bond films is the undercurrent of sexuality in them. Horror movies, the same thing. Star Trek, certainly throughout the original series, there is a lot of sexuality there. So I think that it should be embraced by all means. However, that one moment, that one scene in that movie, I think it hurts the character, and I think it hurts the Kirk character as well. And it has only to do with context. You're right that Kirk is topless, shirtless in the first movie. He's shirtless again in the second movie. But the context is that he has just had sex. Alien three-way with women with tails, great. If you wanted to make that into a 20-minute scene, you go right ahead. Because that is something about the Kirk character that he was doing. When it turns into the Carol Marcus character, who we're introduced to as a weapons specialist, who is there because of her scientific necessity and also kind of the underlying intrigue of her relationship to her father, et cetera, and then it turns into the glance, not just by Kirk, but by the camera to catch that. I think it undermines them as characters, and it undermines that scene because there's no context to it other than Kirk being kind of creepy and stealing a glance. Now, personally, Alice Eve is gorgeous, and if there's another way to justify that, go right ahead. If that's the third movie, it's just all that, you go right ahead because I'm sure you can build a story around it. But that's my problem with the way that it was presented in that movie.
I think that's fair. I think that's very fair.
I got to argue with John on one thing, though. This is what we do, by the way, in case you haven't heard our show or in case you haven't heard it lately. The one thing I'll say, it doesn't diminish Kirk's character at all, because Kirk is a young, relatively immature, though maturing guy in this movie. He's more mature at the end of this movie than he was at the beginning, and certainly he's more mature at the beginning of this movie than he was at the beginning of 2009. But I mean, he's still James T. Kirk. I mean, and I'm not saying so that justifies it, because this again is one of the arguments that we have in the '60s. But to say that it diminishes his character, that is his character. I mean, Kirk is going to do that every single time you give him the opportunity.
Well, he's also a starship captain, and he's also held to, we pointed out the inappropriate glance it'll give a yeoman every now and then in the original series, but even then, it's very out of place. And you know what? I tell you what, Ken, because now that we're unloading, because this is now turning into a very different episode. I think we had originally conceived that what we would do is we would do some discussion, we'd talk about Into Darkness. Then we'd play the interview with Bob, and then we'd kind of wrap it up. And now we're actually talking about the things in the movie, where we're talking about the morals, messages, and meanings. We're talking about the things that worked or did not work. So now I'm going to have to
hit it.
Be totally honest here and ask you some questions. And I have to ask you about the Kirk death scene. Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert, by the way, to our audience. The moments from Wrath of Khan and the use of lines and beats from Wrath of Khan. Tell me about that. Tell me how that happened and the discussion about it.
Well, we knew once we had a story that we could pitch to each other without relying on previous knowledge, and we made a decision that Khan might fit in there. Then we thought, okay, well, what is fair game, and what element of that in the theory of harmonizing with canon, as I was saying, things that parallel the other universe. And we thought of the first movie in a sense, from Kirk's point of view, it's a story about a young man finding his destiny. This movie is about Star Trek Into Darkness is about the same man actually finally earning it. And again, using the idea of he got it too fast and that criticism. And so part of earning it meant going a little bit a parallel to what Wrath of Khan did. In Wrath of Khan, he doesn't face death. He, as he says, he's always cheated it, patted himself on the back afterwards, and has to watch his friend die to learn that lesson. In our parallel version of it, he comes to the conclusion that the only way to earn it is to be the guy who's willing to go down for the ship and not watch somebody else do it. And so we could have done that in a number of ways. He could have died in battle with Khan aboard the ship, But once we had Khan, the idea of mirroring that scene started to appeal to us, not only because we have Khan and to dance around it and sort of not. We wanted to embrace it and let you know that we know that we're paying homage to this and we are paralleling it, as opposed to they were just ripping off Khan and didn't even really rip it off. They just sort of he's around, but look, we know it's tricky to tackle essentially one of the most famous scenes in sci-fi history. But our justification in our minds was, and I read this criticism of, well, in Wrath of Khan, they've been friends forever, and it's the end of a friendship. Yes, that's true. In our version, the parallel is it's the first time Spock realizes, damn, Jim Kirk is actually my friend. It's the beginning of their friendship. It is again a mirror, parallel, harmonic version of what happened. And once we find ourselves in that moment, again, using some of the lines from it are to just say, we're not going to reinvent the wheel in this moment. If it ain't broke, kind of don't fix it. But we better have a rationale for why we're doing it. And again, you hear, or at least I hear, more criticism on that scene from people who know Wrath of Khan than from people who don't. Because people who don't, they don't have a previous context that they have to erase. And again, I'm not criticizing fans who criticize that moment. I get it. It's hard to unlearn what you've learned. And we maybe slightly underestimated that truth. But if you don't know anything, you're seeing a guy grow up, willing to die for his crew, and teaching his unemotional friend the lesson that they're friends, and having his friend react. And so that's where that came out of.
And was that mutually agreed upon by you and the other writers and JJ? Did this kind of all come together at the same time, or was it fought, or
Once we decided that Harrison was really Khan, we went for it. We all kind of decided, and we knew that we wanted to echo the impact a little bit of Wrath of Khan in terms of losing somebody, but didn't want to wait a whole movie to get them back. Because we're not gonna. That would have been then truly an exact sort of replica, and I think it would have been false. So for those who are like, well, you just brought him right back, it's like, yeah, but we just gave you the beginning of the next movie, in this movie, so that we can get back to the 5-year mission.
I think the thing that was hard for me as a fan of Wrath of Khan, and it's funny, Ken, you have told me, Ken, even before we started doing this show, before we started doing Mission Log, you told me that Wrath of Khan is your Christmas movie.
Wrath of Khan is absolutely my Christmas movie. Yes, it is. So, I could even tell you why, but that's a boring story. But yeah, I know Wrath of Khan, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think this is a dynamic that we have on the regular Mission Log, is that episodes of the original series, like the Omega Glory or Bread and Circuses, I'm watching it, I'm invested in it, and then in Omega Glory, when the flag comes out, I tune out.
Huh.
I go, oh man, are we really doing this? Huh. In Bread and Circuses, when it's the Son of God, not the Son, I tune out. I'm like, what are we doing here? Why are we hitting over the head? What's happening? And as much as I appreciate and love having this conversation with Ken about the merits of Into Darkness, because I agree with everything. I agree with the idea of risking a summer tentpole movie on an idea, on a philosophy, and questioning our moral response to an attack. I think that's fantastic. I think I tuned out during the radiation chamber scene, and it colored my ability to accept the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you a comparison. Star Trek 09. I can put that, and I was a big fan of that movie. And as an old school Star Trek fan, gladly defend that movie to people who had a problem with it. I put in that movie, and within 8 minutes, my girlfriend is a puddle watching that, because the emotional impact is so extraordinary in that opening sequence.
God, your girlfriend! I'm an emotional.
Ken's in a puddle.
I tear up every time I watch the first 8 minutes of that movie. Every single time, it makes me nuts. Actually, because
we all get choked.
But I'll come back to it and I'll think, it's been long enough now. I've seen it a million times. I know how this is going to happen.
And
every freaking time.
Every time, yeah.
So thanks.
So that's a moment of sacrifice. Brand new characters, new everything that really plays true, and you cannot help but be invested in everything that's going on there. And maybe it as you so rightly point out, that my familiarity with the Wrath of Khan, when I get to that scene and Into Darkness, I sat there at a screening going, wait, they're not really going to do that, are they? Wait, okay, we're getting to the engineering room. We just put Scotty in a chair unconscious. Oh, we're actually doing that now, And then I just start to kind of think ahead of the movie rather than being emotionally invested in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the typical reaction. Maybe you've heard that from a lot of Wrath of Khan fans. I don't know.
I don't know how typical it is. I have heard that from a lot of Wrath of Khan fans. Mm-hmm. For others, it worked. I do think, again, I think we underestimated the size of that hill. And when I'm watching it, I think most of the audience knows he's not really going to go, although some did. My old film teacher saw it, and it's like, what? They killed Kirk? Are they, what?
Really?
He couldn't believe it. And thought that was it.
Wow.
Wow. It's amazing how differently it plays for different perceptions.
Because you saw Wrath of Khan when it originally came out,
yeah.
you said. Yeah. And I remember seeing that. I remember being very excited about the motion picture, seeing that in theaters, and then seeing the Wrath of Khan. And, of course, this is pre-internet, so you're picking up Starlog magazine
totally.
at the time, and you're reading about how Leonard Nimoy had it in his contract that Spock had to die at the end of this movie, and that was it. So you left that theater thinking, wow, they really killed Spock, but what a way to kill him. It was nothing but the build-up of the emotion for nearly 20 years and the ultimate sacrifice. And I think it must have been 82, 83 that I saw Gene Roddenberry give a speech at University of Alabama at Birmingham. He brought the cage. He showed it on the 16 millimeter.
Wow.
But every question was about the Wrath of Khan because, as far as we knew, Spock was dead. And we had to wait a couple of years to get an answer to that because there was no speculation online. Yeah. There was no, so...
We knew we couldn't get away with that.
Yeah.
And well, what did you think? You didn't think for a minute that Kirk was going to stay dead there, did you?
Not for a minute.
No.
And I think that's okay. I think for a fan, you're playing the home game.
Yeah.
And you were able to calculate where it was going because Yeah. Non-fans, they don't know.
Right.
They don't know what's happening. And so part of the impact, I think, doesn't land on us fans as much in that moment because A, we know he's probably going to go on.
Yeah.
And B, because the meaning of it is different. You're not lamenting the end of a friendship. It's sort of cementing the beginning of one. And so this isn't a justification, but the other element of that scene that plays or that we were playing for as opposed to straight like where I'm trying to make you cry over his death is the conversation about I'm afraid to die. How do you not feel this fear?
Mm-hmm.
And Spock saying I'm having a hard time not feeling right now. To me that was a goal of that scene, that whether he's dying or not, I like the conversation. Especially in light of Spock sitting there with Pike and sort of feeling his feelings when he dies. And so it was more of I like to think of that as like that scene as it's a near-death experience that Kirk has. And it allows them to talk about near-death experiences in the light of all the death that they've seen. But I understand your criticism of not falling for it and of it, not having the same impact. We never expected the same impact.
Right.
We're going for a different feeling, and I think I'll be curious to see what you think of it, seeing it again at a future date when you know the whole score.
I saw it 3 times in a week.
In a week, wow.
And then online.
Wow.
Going into this, I guess.
Wait.
Go ahead, Ken.
You're beating him up enough. Let me go the other way really quickly.
I think it's extraordinarily civil and interesting.
No, it absolutely is, and I will say, I'm if I'm listening, I'm jealous of us because we get to sit here and have this conversation. Let me go the other way really quickly though. We all know I can do lines from the scene in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. We all know how Spock deals with this situation. We don't know how Kirk deals with this because, as you say, in Wrath of Khan, there's the whole wink and a nod, like I've never really faced death. And then when he has to, the death of his friend, yes, theoretically, Kirk has come close to death before, but we always know it's not going to happen. I mean, we've always known up to that point it's not going to happen. So giving us a chance to sort of examine what that would look like from the other side is kind of interesting. There's also a little bit of the, the idea that maybe some of the Spock friendship is already starting to rub off on Kirk, in that, he is willing to go in there and sacrifice himself. But I think the most important thing for me to say, there is important stuff that happens in Act 4 of the Omega Glory, John. And I say that both, so that hopefully you'll go back and watch the Omega Glory at some point, but also
don't go back and watch the Omega Glory.
If you hit like one moment come on, dude. There's important stuff going on there. So
no risk, no reward, pal.
But that's just it. I mean, we can look at this movie, and as we look at all of Star Trek, we're looking at it in two different ways. We're looking for the morals, meanings, messages. We also ask ourselves, does this show hold up? Does it hold up as, individually? Does an episode hold up as something you can watch today, nearly 50 years later, and go, this is well written, well made, I'm invested in it, all of those questions. And with Into Darkness, I have to look at it both ways, and I go, yeah, there's a movie with a message, and there's a movie with a thought-provoking idea, just like Corbomite Maneuver, which was very easy for me to dismiss 2 decades ago. Go, oh, yeah, it's the one with the monster, but it's really Clint Howard, blah, blah, blah. But then there's a message at the end that says we have to ask ourselves who we are in the face of danger. It's great. And in no way will I deny that of Into Darkness, because it dares to ask that question. But as a movie, as somebody who has enjoyed Star Trek before, sitting in the audience, waiting to be surprised, entertained, wowed, all of these things going through my head, I get to that point and I go, oh, I wanted something different. And I think there's part of me that has a little bit of a fear that is, okay, if that scene isn't written for me, if it's written for a different audience who are not the people who have seen Wrath of Khan 30 times and still get choked up at that scene, at Spock's death, if that's not written for me, and it is written for people who have maybe a passing familiarity with Khan, does it then play as parody? When we've had George Costanza yelling Khan in Seinfeld, or any time somebody says, no, I am your father, now it plays as parody of that scene in Empire Strikes Back. Or when somebody yells Khan, it plays as parody of that scene in Wrath of Khan.
I would argue that it's still written for you.
Yeah.
But us people who know Trek, I guess I expect us to play three-dimensional chess a little bit. You have a more refined palette than your regular viewer, and so for me, the way that I would hope that a Trek fan who is pulled out of the movie as you were, and who the experience changes when you see that moment. That's when you're swirling the wine in your mouth and that's when you should be trying to taste the complicated flavors, even if it's not exactly the guzzling of wine that you were hoping for.
I think it was actually drinking Jameson during the screening. Yeah,
I think at that point it does become maybe more of an intellectual exercise for some of us Trek fans who do know Wrath of Khan. And to me, that is that in that sense, the scene is written for you. In that sense, you are there now playing the home game and analyzing it in a way that others can't.
Yeah.
And I guess, as you're saying, it comes at a price. The price is you've been seeing the movie one way until that moment, and then suddenly you're writing a dissertation about it in your mind about, is this working, or, like the
right.
comparison to this or that. I would argue there's value to that, and that I don't discount your criticism, and yet it's not as easy to unpack that scene and just say, It's easy. It is easy to say, and you're right to say, I wish I'd seen something else. I don't think that what happens from that point on in the movie is something that isn't juicy to analyze, as we're doing now.
Right. All right, well, mark this moment, Ken, where Bob Orci validates my feelings.
He won't make that mistake again.
And Rod, who's too embarrassed to chime in at this point, says, "I think John is crazy. I love the ending, the homage." And that's why Rod will remain a silent partner in the show. Can you tell us really quickly? You mentioned the cut scene that could have potentially bridged the Carol Marcus going into the space.
Oh yeah.
Were there other cut scenes that we should be aware of that maybe
nothing
in the script?
Nothing major. This one, in the first movie there were whole sequences that didn't make it, like Nero's prison break and all kinds of stuff. This one, most of it ended up on screen. I'm having trouble, stuff sort of changed, but I don't know that we filmed a whole lot that didn't make it. Pretty much by the time we were shooting, we had to have it locked down.
Yeah, there are many, many things that I very gladly accept about, however you want to call it, reboot. Do you refer to it as a reboot?
Call it a sequel.
Here? Sequel? Okay. Well, I mean, going back to 2009.
Yeah, it's a sequel.
Sequel? Okay, cool. Sequel, prequel, rehash, reboot, restart.
Not a reboot. I don't accept reboot.
All right, that's cool.
I get why you don't, because you had Nimoy.
Yeah,
correct. That's why it was that or nothing.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Sorry, not to use a hackneyed
phrase. No, that was good.
Fascinating.
Well played, Ken. There are many changes that I accept and embrace. I like that. And where I stumbled, as we've now beaten to death, is just the emotional moment, So there, but I got to say my piece, and I got to say it in front of the guy who wrote it. So
now let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
When Kirk yells Khan in Wrath of Khan, why is he so mad?
He's not mad. It's a ruse.
It's a ruse.
So
he's faking that scream.
He is screaming for Khan to hear it. Because remember, that is also the scene where he and Spock have also just played out what the game is. And the game is...
So he's faking it.
Yeah.
He's faking it.
He's faking it. Now, he can be mad about a lot of things. He can be mad about potentially having been beaten. But I think there's a lot going on there. It's not purely out of anger.
And when did you come to this conclusion?
I don't know what. The 20th time I watched it out of the 30 or 40 or whatever.
So not this week.
No, not this week.
Fair enough.
No. And here's what's so interesting about that scene. That scene is parodied over and over and over again, and it's parodied for anger. Oh, God, I'm so mad at you. But that's the Kirk gambit. That's Kirk being 2 steps ahead of Khan. And you have to... I remember as a kid seeing that for the first few times. I had no idea what was going on. Oh, no, Kirk's been beaten. Oh, wait, Kirk got lucky. But then we realized later on that Kirk did not get lucky. Kirk had a plan. He got lucky with the plan, but he had a plan. So, yeah, Spock yelling Khan
was not a ruse.
He was angry, and he let his emotional self get the better of him.
Correct.
So they play differently. They absolutely play differently as scenes. But like I said, I think that Khan, yelling Khan, all of this stuff has now become a part of pop culture. It's not just the purview of Star Trek anymore. So when you have it on Seinfeld, for all the people who have just, oh yeah, I remember that scene where that guy yelled Khan, it sort of takes the weight out of it.
You're killing me with this.
Why am I killing you with this?
You're killing me with this because...
We're having a conversation that's awesome.
If everybody can do that thing that came from Star Trek, why can't Star Trek? It happens in a it happens in a different way this time. I mean, this time, and honestly, what John was just saying, Bob, he actually told me that when we were in Vegas like about a month ago, and it blew my mind when he said it, because if you work the time, he's actually probably right, but that's not what's going on this time. I mean, there's still fixed points in time, and yeah, Spock gets to be angry sometimes. I mean, Spock has bloodlust by the time he actually catches up with Khan on the surface.
Ken, here's what's going to happen. A year from now, it's going to be you and me and Bob in Vegas, in a hotel room.
And Rod.
And Rod for about 4 hours hashing this out.
Okay. We start with shots, we end with shots. And there should be shots in the middle.
In between,
We start with shots during Spock's brain, where you have to take a shot every time they say Spock's brain.
Love it.
And one of us will be dead by the end of it.
We'll never get to Into Darkness then.
Let me ask you this. I mean, so we're talking, in this case, in Into Darkness, the Prime Directive and Kirk's speech at the end, really being about what is politically topical. Certainly Into Darkness is inspired by what happened at 9/11 and the war on terror, quote unquote, happening after that. Now we're faced with a new situation that you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, talking about Syria, and what are our responsibilities to other cultures? When is it right for us to step in? When is it wrong for us to step in? Is there more of that Star Trek needs to continue to explore? And I assume yes, but what are the other important topics that Star Trek can and should try to tackle?
Like I said, no one episode or one movie of Star Trek can cover all the things that Star Trek can cover. So, yes, in the future, I think it should continue to cover the politics of the day, just like it did in the 60s with, again, representing Kennedy, representing a thawing of the Cold War through Chekhov, representing civil rights through Uhura, representing all kinds of stuff that's in this swirl. NASA shut down recently. Or so we're led to believe, anyway. The idea of not being in constant conflict and actually having a little bit of leisure time to dream about pure exploration and pure scientific goodness and pure helping ourselves out through climbing a mountain. I think that's a place for Star Trek to continue to go to. I think some of the best Star Trek did that, and it reflects, in a way, Into Darkness, as Scotty says, reflects the fact that we're taking our eye off the ball a little bit in terms of these great things that we could be doing. We could be building great things. We could be rebuilding our country and rebuilding the world, and instead we're mired in conflict. And it'd be nice to not always be mired in conflict. Though that is the state of our world right now, Star Trek is able to do both. I think it can reflect, as Star Trek Into Darkness did, the fact that, God, I'd like to be, Scotty, I'd like to be exploring too, man, but we got this problem right now. I think future Star Trek can show the other side too, that sometimes you have bought yourself the time and you've earned yourself the freedom to just see what's on top of the mountain and not anticipate evil.
So is Star Trek, you described it as both a reflection of what's going on now, but also some level of inspiration. Aspiration. So is it an even remotely believable roadmap of where humanity should go? Are you optimistic about that future? What would we have to do to get to that point?
Look, I'm just a hacky screenwriter. That's a big question.
You heard it here first, folks.
I'm mindful of the fact that I'm one of a few caretakers of Star Trek for now, and that I'm in a way a slightly half-appointed, half-elected official whose term will end, and I'm lucky enough to be serving Star Trek right now, and therefore I'm mindful of it not being simply a excuse or a mouthpiece for whatever my personal views are. I read some critical reviews calling me out in particular for some of the conspiracy-minded things that I've said online. what I like to call conspiracy realism. And so I read a couple of reviews where someone said something like, hey, I'd love the message of the movie if I didn't know that Bob Orci was such a nut who probably didn't really mean what the text of the movie said, but he really is hiding his secret political conspiracy theories. My response to that would be that it's just a question. The movie is a question. It's not an answer. And so those who say like the movie is, well, that movie clearly it's his point of view that that Bin Laden was not behind 9/11, or that the Boston bombers were whatever. That's not true. The movie is exactly what it says it is, and to reuse the rules of canon, only what is filmed is canon, I think, is the fan consensus, I think, right now.
And maybe not the animated series. But
and maybe not the animated series, actually. So it's meant to be a question. Look at the first movie where Spock is Obama and Kirk is Bush. They're both still our presidents, and they're both still the heroes of the movie, but they have different styles at the time. When Obama was nothing but promise and potential and opportunity. And the same in this movie. Khan does bad things, but it's never that simple. He has a case and he has been manipulated, and it's wonderful to be able to honor Star Trek and also have it honor itself by being able to raise these questions without being didactic about it. But and it's not the first time. Undiscovered Country was very much a political movie, and it's interesting to see some of the anger generated by even trying to tackle a subject that is so on our minds. But again, it's the power of Star Trek that allowed us to get away with it. Normally, had any of these viewpoints been associated with something else, I don't know that we'd get away with it. I think the power of Star Trek is that you can use it as a megaphone to ask a question, and that is its true cultural treasure and its true cultural significance. Because ultimately, you're going to get some people on the periphery of the spectrum who will attack no matter what you say in Star Trek. But for the most part, there are shields up around Star Trek. There are shields around that ship that allow you to get crazy and to do some cool stuff. And it's easy to forget how in the 60s how forward-looking it was, and how many barriers it was breaking, and how many moral dilemmas it was tackling. And I think it was just so something you hadn't seen before that at the time I think it escaped. It was so deft at actually reflecting on society that it escaped anger. Now we're all plugged in and we're all super savvy, and audiences are super savvy, and they can smell when something is becoming slightly important. and so they'll react accordingly based on their worldview. Part of the response to darkness is that some people, when faced with the enormity of the painful things that exist on this planet, they think, I'm powerless. I'm just one person, what can I do? As you probably know from my Twitter feed, I've adopted the point of view that the one thing we can all do is just say something. In fact, I'll take that from Homeland Security. If you see something, say something. So every time I see one of those tweets, I go, I just saw Dick Cheney. Go get him. Saying something actually is quite a bit. It's quite a big thing to do. Simply going, I don't like that. I wish we wouldn't do that. That is, especially in this day and age, especially with social media and with the ability for your voice to be heard around the world, no matter who you are, saying something actually is quite a bit of a fight. It's quite a bullet to have in your gun without even having to have a bullet. And so I liken social media and the internet to the printing press. I think that it could indeed be a conduit for all of us talking about what we all think is right and actually making it clear. So, and that's why, okay, the NSA is spying on me. Well, then I'm going to speak up a lot. Because, okay, I'm glad they're recording it. I'm glad they have Nielsen ratings to gauge whether or not we all want to go to Syria.
Yeah.
Wrong or right, that's what you can do. So I'm hopeful that the lessons that we have from history these days are able to be processed much faster than they were before. We can all analyze an event now in a way that we never could before, and we can all come to consensus on it in a way that we never could before at the speed of light. So, assuming the internet doesn't get taken over soon, I'm hopeful.
I cannot thank our guest enough. This
pleasure.
Has been awesome. Absolutely fantastic.
Anytime.
And anytime. We're doing this every week now.
I was just going to say, you want to say same time next week?
Yeah, and you're going to give us an update every week on Star Trek 3?
Yeah, as long as you have stuff to pitch me.
The Trial of Khan?
Yeah.
It'll be great.
Exactly.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken, one of the cool things about sitting down with Bob and having this conversation, and I hope we get to do it again, because I think we almost just scratched the surface, even for as much as we got out of him. He said a lot as he was leaving, and there are a few other little knowledge bombs I'd like to drop here. First of all, Harrison, the John Harrison character, was originally written as Erickson. So the actors are saying Erickson, and then they were all dubbed to say Harrison. And also before that, that character was supposed to be Robert April. So I thought it was very interesting that they had, written something from the canon, and then they decided to go a different direction, and then they changed it again. But you know what this all comes down to is another little bit of information that I thought was fascinating. They used Harrison/Erickson as a way to kind of obfuscate the idea of Khan. He says that he thinks that all the secrecy about Khan was probably a bad idea. And I have to agree.
Yeah, I was going to say there are a lot of people who would agree with him on that.
Yeah. But he said, this is not a writer decision. This is kind of the way that JJ operates, is trying to create some mystery, some intrigue around a product. And I don't want plot points leaked, but I feel like that is not a plot point. It didn't. I would say it definitely did not help my enjoyment of the movie to not, to go in there with this idea of, oh, it's not Khan, but we all really know that it's Khan. I think that kind of hurt it. So I thought that was interesting. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that he said that for the next movie that they write, he really wants to concentrate on cementing the Kirk, Spock, McCoy relationship. And for that, yes, the slow clap as he left, because I agree. I think that's something that we're missing. We get tastes of it. But I really want to see more of that, and he's on the same page with fans who say that as well.
Do you think he was serious when he said that we need to pitch him ideas the next time we talk to him?
Even if he wasn't serious, I'm going to take that seriously, and I'm just going to constantly send him ideas.
Because I've got thoughts.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, get me on an elevator with that man.
All right.
30 seconds. And I'll pitch him an idea. Here's the idea, just to give you, sort of an idea. I really think it ought to cement the Kirk, Spock, McCoy relationship.
Oh, okay, good. We'll go with that.
I think I'm halfway to a movie.
I think you are. Hey, I want to seriously and sincerely thank our listeners who allowed us to kind of step out and do this special with Bob Orci. And you have been continuing to send in your thoughts, your questions, your comments and ideas. We're going to return very soon to our regular supplemental format where we get to engage a little more with those questions. We had to get this one out there. We are going to play some more from our time in Vegas because that was a blast, and we have some really cool content from that. And then we'll get back to our regular Q&A format and some other very interesting interviews coming up.
Now leaving Nerdist.com.